All right, troops. Campbell, great to see you, my friend. How you been?
I'm fine, thank you, Andrew. It's lovely to see you. I'm going to say, and you know what I'm going to say, right at the very beginning, I want everybody out there in Lanarkshire to know I knew this guy before he was famous. And here we are. Who would have thought that you'd be interviewing me on your radio show? So proud
Well,
of you. Well done.
well, thank you very much, my friend. Like it's amazing
Yeah,
how life kind of swings and roundabouts, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. And it certainly is. But I'm pleased to see you doing this, and you've been doing a grand job. So well done.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. But before my face goes the same color as my hair, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you. And we'll start with your
Well,
origin story, because the one thing we all
oh,
have in common is that we all have an origins. So for my
right.
followers, please tell us your origin story.
Okay, well, I mean, as you can probably gather, I'm quite old, so this could take a long time. So you chiver me along if I take too long. I was born in, unfortunately, in 1955. I say unfortunately, I'm glad I was born, but it's such a long time ago now. Born in Glasgow, moved to East Kilbride when I was 8 with my parents and family. Essentially brought up in East Kilbride. Went to school, did all the usual childhood things. Had a fairly happy upbringing, no problems at all. And then I went to university, studied psychology. I was also, for much of my earlier life, into religion, I have to admit. I don't know if that was something you were aware of when we knew each other. I think I kept it fairly under the radar, but
Yeah. It was
I
quite
was
under the radar when we knew each other.
yeah,
Don't
I,
wouldn't have bothered
I
either
was
way. Like,
no, no, but I'm always intrigued as to what impression I was giving people. But I was a Mormon,
oh,
commonly known as a Mormon. So certainly when I was about 23, I went abroad. You know how you have no Mormon missionaries knocking on your doors?
hmm,
I did that when I was 23 and I went over to French Canada and did that for 2 years there. So that's part of my origin. I'm no longer a believer in religion as
hmm,
such, but that's part of my who I am, and I'm certainly proud of it in many ways. And it's
hmm,
helped to shape what I am now. But I've kind of not lost. I've changed my faith, my nature of it. So
hmm.
I'm not an active churchgoer anymore. But it was a vital part of my life. I married a young woman who was a member of the church, and we wanted to try and stay within the faith. And so that woman was my wife, Anne,
Hmm.
and we had 4 kids. We now have 5 grandkids.
Hmm.
Eventually, I moved into career and social work,
Hmm.
and that's where you and I had the opportunity of meeting.
Yes,
And I
that was
remember
where we
having,
crossed paths, my friend.
indeed, and I always remember having some fascinating chats with you.
Hmm.
And I was impressed with what you told me about what you were doing with yourself. And I'm glad you're still pursuing your dreams. It's
Well,
tremendous.
thank you.
For
And
my
you're a bit of a dark horse yourself, my friend. Like, because one of the things that we did talk about, because we never really talked about work, because why would I talk about work that would crush my soul? I
right,
was talking about mainly like your work, like your poetry, and your writing, because you're a fantastic writer, and I always really loved hearing your work and hearing how
yeah,
you came up with
yeah,
your work. So for my audience, like, because I always ask this with anybody that does, like the written word or any type of like creative arts, when you
yeah,
started doing like poetry and like written word, how did that come
yeah.
about? And the process
I
behind it?
I have to admit, I mean, I've been dabbling in poetry since about the age of 6.
Mm,
Um, and when I was in school, I thought I would become a doctor. And so I think there's one good piece of advice for anybody is look for what you're good at, not what you think you might be good at. And I wasted too much time trying to understand physics and chemistry.
mm,
And meanwhile, I was sailing through English, getting A grades all the time, and my creative writing was good, but I wanted to be a doctor.
mm,
And so I made, let's call it a strategic error at that early stage in my life, and kind of put to one side what my skill set was, and tried to do that instead, and wasted a lot of time. Eventually, I settled, so to speak, for social work, which is probably let's call it a happy compromise between being kind of a healing souls, as it were, Whether social work really does that, I'm not sure, but it gave me a bit more creative input into people's lives. So, but I kept writing, and it's really just amateurish all the way through my life. Certainly in the age of the computer, no longer the old-fashioned typewriter. I sort of was re-enthused into doing writing, and probably for the last 20 years, 25 years, I've just been doing a lot of amateur writing. I kind of self-published books before I discovered that I could send away the stuff to a printing company and get a proper book published. So I was doing books. We used to go on holidays a lot with extended family and friends. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Bryson, the writer. He's an American guy that came over to live in Britain, and he wrote Notes from a Small Island, a kind of a whimsical look at his time in Britain. I was quite inspired by that, so I was writing whimsical stories about our holidays in France and Spain and Italy. A bit of a different take from the usual holiday pictures. These were holiday books, about 60,000 words. They're only they were just for friends and family, but it's a marvelous remembrance of our holidays, telling just tales of a funny thing happened to us on our way to Barcelona, kind of thing. So it was great fun, and yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed like writing a lot of poetry. To my regret, I probably have written 500 plus poems in my life. I've lost them all. Well, not quite lost them all, but I've got maybe half of them, 300 of them still because of modern computers. But I think there's so many of them that are gone. It's like losing your kids. It's quite
Yeah.
tragic, you know. But
Well,
I
I do
enjoy doing it.
sympathise
It's
with
a good
that, my
laugh.
friend, because obviously
Yeah,
you knew that I used to do the performing arts and things as well, and I had
yeah,
a collection of like stuff that I'd done, like programs and
yeah,
recordings, like from when I was
yeah,
young up until when I'd
yeah,
stopped. And the flat
yeah,
that we were living in at the time when I was working with yourselves, what damp had seeped through, and but we didn't realize, and it destroyed all my
yeah.
memories.
I know.
And
It's
I kind of
it's
took it as like, I'm not a religious guy. I was like, but there's a sign for somebody either up there or down there that was like, right,
by all
stop
means,
holding
I
on to the
yeah,
past and let him move on.
yeah,
But the one thing that
same,
did survive was
yeah,
was the poems that I did in primary school
yeah, good,
and
good,
high school as well. So
yeah,
like that's the
yeah,
three that I was published for. So I was like,
yeah.
hey, I've got them. So
Oh, well done.
they're
Yeah.
safe in my
I've,
memory box.
Yeah, I've even written plays. I mean, but it's still amateur stuff. As I said, I used to have that church connection. There were youth groups, and we used to. I would write plays, and they would be performed. Kind of a get together. All the various churches from around the Glasgow area would get together for so-called cultural evenings, and and each of the local churches would produce its own wee play, and people would applaud it and give it votes and so on. And I was the regular playwright within the East Kilbride Church. And so I can say, in all honesty, I have had plays performed on stage. It's stretching the point, but it's true, you know.
Well,
So I'm quite
hey, you
proud
wrote
of that as well.
something, people performed it, and people saw it.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
it.
the literal
That's it.
definition
Yeah,
of a show. So
yeah,
there you go. Like
yeah.
we have way more than I did. Like I had one, and then it was
Yeah,
like I am completely broken. I'm out.
yeah. Well, it's good stuff, you know, and I think it's a great way of it's very cathartic to write. You'll know that.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a chance to explore your emotions and perhaps at times say things that you wouldn't want to say, but you can say it in poetry or in in creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. My only regret is I've been saying that to some friends recently. I'm only half excuse me, half mocking my religious upbringing because for many years I remember speaking to my father and he was very very po-faced but a lovely man, and he was always worried about using sweary words and off key comments, and I probably too
Yes.
much in my writing avoided the sweary words until latterly when I've been feeling more liberated
Mm-hmm.
and able to be a bit more blunt in what I write because I think that's important.
Yeah.
If you are too worried about what other people will think,
Mm.
then that's not healthy. I think
Yeah, and I can understand, especially around like swearing, ironically, because like I was the same deal as I didn't like to swear around family. Then you get to that kind of rebellious stage where you're like,
Yeah,
I'll say what I want as long as I don't
yeah,
like, go over the line. Well, I'll
yeah,
swear, but
yeah,
not like in
yeah,
bad
yeah,
ways. And then when you
yeah,
start doing content creation, before you get monetized, well, you're
yeah.
like, this is a platform where I can literally let all the F's and blinds right out. And then once you get
Uh-huh.
monetized and they give you options for, about profanity and stuff, well, and
Hmm.
if you put profanity in, that money that you could make goes down. So I quickly
Yeah,
found that there was a beep button, a censor button,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I could still swear and then I just bleep it out
uh-huh.
and I still get
Yeah,
paid
yeah.
more. So I was like, there we go. I
There's no
found my
doubt.
compromise.
There's no doubt a well-placed swear word helps at times. I'm going to show you this. So this is there we go. That's a book that I've written about
Oh,
my wife's experience, which we may touch on later on. And in
yes, we will.
here there is one sweary word. I managed to
Oh,
finally convince myself 153,000 words, and I agonized over putting this sweary word in it. I thought, what will my
mm,
family and friends think? But it's a little poem. I won't repeat the poem because I can't quite remember it. But the
mm.
word rhymes with truck, and originally I had the word feck, and I kept looking at it and thinking it's not quite conveying the depth of the emotion, blah blah
Hmm.
blah. And
Yeah.
eventually I put the proper rhyming word in. It's in the book, and I know that I
Mm.
probably caused a few raised eyebrows from some immediate family and friends when they've read the book. Oh my goodness, did he
Well,
really say that word?
I think out of 153,000 words, and
It's not bad.
there's one swear word. That's very, very impressive. You look at like
Yeah,
any types of publications, like there is
yeah,
a
yeah.
plethora of curse words. I knew that I had something wrong when I sent like a script to get reviewed, and the positive comment I got was inventive use of cursing.
Very good.
What? So it was.
Well, it can be creative. It can be creative. Earlier in my life, I used to think, "Oh, that's not nice," but
mm,
I think it can enhance your
mm.
your work times.
Yeah, well, and a well
Carefully,
placed swear word, like
carefully
you said,
placed.
like
Yeah,
when it comes to plays as well, a well placed
yeah.
swear word and the way it's said can really drive the
I,
impact of the emotion. Like it's not necessarily you don't swear for
yeah,
swearing's sake. It's just
no,
because what if
yeah,
it's well placed, it can really add
yeah,
impact. But let's
yeah.
talk about the book since you brought it up. Like
Oh,
so,
thank you very much. I have to stress, it's not. It's self-published. It's not for sale. I can't figure out how to do all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to figure out how to maybe get it onto Amazon because I would like to. Not, I'm not looking to monetize it or make money from it, but I would like to grow its audience. But I managed to print about 50 under my own auspices last year. It's only a year old, and
mm,
obviously it's gone to family and friends. And um, well, so the story is it's called Dancing Queen, Love in a Care Home Lockdown. Now, I'll try and be very brief here. My story is my dear wife Anne. She contracted Alzheimer's at the age of 55. About that's about 10 years ago,
mm,
and we're all probably quite familiar with what Alzheimer's is like. Most of us think it's an old person's, and possibly to a young person like you, 55 is old. But to me, she
no,
was
not
still
at
a
all.
teenager when she caught Alzheimer's at 55, and so it took its dreadful course. And eventually, to try and cut a very long story short, she took seriously ill at one point, and dare I say it, I had an interesting altercation with the local
Mm,
social work department who refused to grant the funds that would have given her the care package that might have kept her at home. And they had their wicked way, and
mm,
she was placed in a nursing home at the age of 59, which was quite a tragedy.
yeah,
There we go. Nobody saw COVID coming.
no.
So that's like a double, triple whammy. Early onset Alzheimer's, forced into a nursing home, and then COVID.
Mm-hmm,
And what happened with COVID, probably not a lot of people have really caught on because everybody suffered with COVID. We know that everybody was affected by it.
mm-hmm,
Obviously, I'm kind of biased in the sense that my wife was in a care home, and on March 13th, 2020, I rocked up to the front door for my usual daily visit, and the door was locked. And a nurse who came it's a big nursing home, so a nurse that came to the door that I didn't know. I said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'm in to see my wife. You can't come in. We're under quarantine. If we let you in, you'll spread the virus and we'll get sued." That was it. I didn't get to be with my wife Anne for the next 7 months. um, 29, 30 weeks, 220 days, goodness knows. Never saw her, except for one or two window visits that we were allowed. And it's absolutely shocking. So this book catalogues, though there was from March 2020 until November 21 when she died, it catalogues almost on a painfully day by day basis as to what it was like. Not so much, I can never quite be sure how it was for her, but we
Yeah.
certainly have a good guess how it must have been for her, but certainly how it was for us as a family. And there's a lot of reflection on bigger issues. But to take somebody, my wife at that point when COVID struck had fairly well advanced Alzheimer's and really had lost the power of speech and had to be cared for 24/7. We could still have done it in the house, but that issue's over. Um, and she needed somebody to be with her, to hold her hand, to talk to her, to whisper to her, to sing songs with her, to share memories with her. In short, the kind of thing that, dare I say it, only her husband of 35 years or her children or close, dear friends could offer her. And we were banned for 7 months from doing that with her. And the likelihood is that she spent the bulk of those 7 months in her room on her own, probably, I suspect, trying to say things that don't get sued by the for defamation. But I imagine Alexa was often used and was cranked up loud. They didn't have the staff to give the kind of. I was visiting my wife 5 hours a day, every day, and suddenly all that was gone. Plus all the other friends and family who were visiting her. The three carers on the floor for 15 residents plus one nurse did not have the ability, quite obviously, to spend that kind of time with all of their residents. So God knows what kind of damage was done to somebody that was already incredibly fragile, and she couldn't speak up for herself. A bit of a nightmare, to be honest.
Yeah.
So the book tells our whole story right up until the day she dies, and some coverage of her funeral too. If I move on from that in a bit, she then became one of our daughters, Natasha, was particularly keen to be involved, and Natasha started a petition, and she managed to raise in a couple of months, a few months anyway, close on 100,000 signatures, 96,000 signatures, and specifically calling for the right to visitation, even in the times of a pandemic. I think what a lot of people didn't realize that I know that there were many issues around the pandemic, but people were bending the rules, and I'm not suggesting people should have bent the rules, but very, very few people were literally under lock and key.
Yeah.
I could not bend the rules with my wife. I could not sneak in the back door. She was under lock and key, and I can't stress that enough. We couldn't get near her. To gain access, I had to break the window to get directly into her room, or there were something like 5 locked doors I would have had to go through. I mean, I just could not. And very, very few other people had people standing outside their house, locking the door and barring their friends and relatives from seeing them. For most of us, myself included, back in my own flat, it was a matter of honour. You were either a good citizen and tried to observe the rules, or maybe you didn't. I'm not sure, but we had no choice with Anne. She was held captive. It's as simple as that, and we didn't have a clue what was going on inside. And I'm not suggesting by any stretch that she was being abused or anything, but I do think there's such a thing as abuse by default, where if the care home wasn't properly equipped to give her the kind of help that she needed, then, by default, she was, in a sense, being abused, certainly being harmed. And, but they were just totally intransigent, wouldn't open up at all. And of course, that was going right up to First Minister level. So that petition that was started by our daughter Natasha, was picked up on by the Sunday Mail. So we're very grateful for Sunday Mail for doing that. And they highlighted a lot of the issues. It became known as Anne's Law. And it's currently kind of almost, it's not quite, it's been put into, there's a big bill going through Parliament at the moment called the National Care Service Bill. And not to get too detailed about it, but in section 40 has become the focal point for an Anne's Law. It's a very small section that enables some form of an Anne's Law to be passed. Unfortunately, the wording makes it not the kind of an Anne's Law that we want. And also, the National Care Service Bill has attracted a lot of criticism in Civic Scotland. A lot of trades unions and political parties and professional bodies. But because it's such a big bill, everybody's got a fault to find with the National Care Service Bill, and it's currently been sidelined, and is not due to have the first of three major votes until the end of January in 2024, which means it's already been delayed by a year. And some of the word out on the street is this bill is going nowhere, which means that Section 40 is going nowhere, which means that Anne's Law's going nowhere. So it's a bit of a struggle. And the book is really a testament to the fact that we need something so that if there is another pandemic, and I think they're saying not if, but when, we need the right of at least just one relative to be allowed entry into the care home, observing all the anti-infection protocol, and spend intimate time with their relative or their friend, so that they are never again forced into that kind of situation. All of the research is telling us that the damage to the residents' mental health has to have been extreme, and indeed their physical health. It's a well-known correlation between, if your mental health suffering, your physical health suffers, and vice versa. And so it's really just to try and see if that should never happen again. Too little, too late for Anne, but if she can be of some benefit to other people, I think it's kind of tribute to her as my wife, and certainly Natasha and I and others are giving oral evidence to the national inquiry in Edinburgh, the Scottish COVID inquiry. We're due to appear next Tuesday, I think it is, the 7th, and give oral witness. So it's another opportunity just to stand in public and say, my name's Campbell Duke. I am the husband stroke widower of Anne Duke, and here's her story. And that will be good for me in terms of catharsis, but I also, I think, in terms of just trying to move the dial a bit and have people understand that you can't be doing that to people,
No,
That's it
definitely not.
in a nutshell, but there's so much more to than that, but I think that's in a nutshell. And we're also thinking about the staff in the care homes. These people, I think, were abused by the government, or by the powers that be, as I call them, and were made to appear to be, or had to adopt the guise of angels who were sacrificing everything for the better care of their residents. And yet there are all sorts of horror stories coming out now telling us that inevitably and understandably, the care home staff were suffering dreadfully as well. These people were watching far too many people die. They weren't being given proper equipment or training. There was no extra staffing allowed for them, and they were dropping like flies. An organisation called Scottish Care, who, amongst others, look out for the welfare of care home staff, were notably saying during the crisis, during the pandemic, that staff were phoning in sick, not because of COVID, they just couldn't manage the stress. Some of them were taken seriously ill, and they spoke of suicidal ideation amongst care home staff. And I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that these people were being expected to do something that realistically they weren't capable of doing. And that's not to slur or accuse them of anything. What an awful task to be expected of them. And all the family and all the friends had disappeared. I'm not sure what they thought I was meant to do during the pandemic. Learn how to cook sourdough bread and learn how to play the recorder and binge watch on Netflix while they carried out all the heavy lifting. It seemed ridiculous. I mean, none of us as a family wanted them or expected them to suffer the way they did. So, I mean, we were on the side of the care staff too. But sadly, the nature of the beast was that relatives and staff who formerly used to work good with each other became kind of separated, and the wagons were circled, and it became a bit of a mutual distrust because we weren't working together, so we weren't sure what they were doing. They thought we just wanted to come in and have a big party. When we were saying let us in, we didn't mean that I was going to come down with my mates from the pub, all 10 of us, and have a party in my wife's room. I just meant me in my apron, my gloves, and but it became terribly, terribly complicated and totally unsatisfactory. A lot of people suffered a lot, um, and it really didn't clear up much. So when Anne died in November 2021, most of society had got kind of back to semi-normal, I suspect, and very few people realised even at that point, Anne remained under lock and key. Nobody could get near her unless they got permission from the care home management. So even on the morning that she died, two sisters-in-law were having to phone the office to see if they could arrange an appointment to come and visit Anne. And they knew she was dying. And it turns out that there were no staff, there was no admin staff because it was Saturday morning. Rather bizarre to think that in the midst of a global pandemic, that the care home couldn't find its way to even have somebody manning their telephones at the weekend. But that seemed to be asking too much of them. We managed to get them in eventually, but even at the point when Anne died, there was only me and one of her daughters in the room because the other two daughters and her son were on their way from various parts of the country because they too had to be phoning up and saying, "Can I come and see my mum?" Yes, but you need to make an appointment. You need to have an LFT test, and etc. etc. This is on the day she was dying, and they knew she was dying. I'm not angry with the staff. I think the whole problem was that all of us were so caught up in trying to understand these crazy rules that all common sense had flown out the window. And we were so desensitized or so scared or so cowed into trying to behave ourselves over those months for fear that had we become problematic, the manager may have decided to ban us again simply because of our behaviour and our attitude. So we were always very kind of obsequious and yes, okay, that's your time up now, that's your 30 minutes, Campbell. Okay. And I would go. And I often wondered what would have happened if I'd simply said, I ain't going. No doubt probably at some point the police would have been called and I would have been marched out of the building and possibly charged with breach of the peace or something. That's how serious it was, but we never stressed that. And one of my many guilt complexes about it is, should I have done that? Was I too worried about upsetting the staff that I let my wife suffer? So there's a tremendous amount of guilt. In the world that I'm operating in at the moment with lots of care home relatives, that's one of the overwhelming feelings that we all have, that we feel guilty because we either didn't do enough or what we did just didn't seem to help. And you become quite obsessive about it,
Yeah,
and it affects your mental health.
it
There's
does.
a lot of people. Yeah, sorry, on you go.
No, well, it would affect your mental health. What it's probably as a appropriate time to ask like the final question that I would ask for this because
Yeah.
you would know the answer to this more than anybody considering what you went through.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Yeah.
could give one piece of advice to anybody struggling with mental health at this point in time, what would that piece of advice be and why?
I think certainly you find common cause with others who are feeling the same way, and don't be ashamed to say this isn't good. We found great value in simply standing up. We went to Parliament, we did all sorts of other things. It didn't necessarily make any great difference, but what we were saying is we're hurting and we're not going to be quiet about it. And it's okay to express your emotions and say, do you know what? This isn't right. It doesn't always necessarily mean you'll get something fixed. I wish I could say that that's all you need to do, but bottling it up just doesn't help. And I mean, the only solace I can get is the fact that we can look back and say, we did not shut up. We stood outside Parliament. We wrote books. We appeared on TV, and we did our best. It may not have been enough, but we didn't lie low and just accept our fate. I think it's just having that courage to say, I'm hurting,
Yeah,
and somebody needs to hear this.
definitely.
So,
Well, and it's quite appropriate that you said that, Anne's Law is going to be like getting looked at in January 2024, because by the time this recording comes out, it will be the start of January. So this
yeah,
is going to be an appropriate time for it to come out so we can try and raise more awareness of it. So
yeah.
if there is anything that you can promote just now to help raise
Mhm.
awareness of it with the last few
Sure.
minutes that we have, please do so.
Mhm. Just I think it's about being the thing is, I mean, I appreciate there are many issues in life. I mean, I'm not overly concerned. I've never been overly concerned about motor neuron disease because it's never come into my immediate sphere of existence. And I'm aware that not everybody can be overly concerned about Alzheimer's, about care homes and so on. But it would be to say to people, don't take it for granted that the government and the powers that be know best. There's a tremendous ability for the system, as I call it, for bureaucracy to presume that it knows best. Um, Without going into any detail with him, working his career perhaps put me in a line of work that maybe had that attitude at times. That we would say to families, we know better than you. We'll tell you what to do. And instead of listening to the families. And so if you hear of somebody that's agonizing about something, even if all you can do is sign a petition or just pat them on the shoulder and say, I wish you well, let
Mm.
let them talk to you, let them hear, empathize. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, if there is any way for you to get that book published like to a wider audience, I highly suggest that you do it.
I'm
Because
working on it.
I personally want a copy myself, because I think that it needs to be
Yeah,
this type of thing needs to be known. We hear
yeah,
about stories like this, what happened during
yeah,
lockdown. We
yeah,
did live it. We went through
yeah.
things. Everybody did, but that type of singular experience where someone where people were forced to not see
Hmm.
anybody,
Yeah,
and hear it from the people who were trying
yeah,
to get in.
yeah,
That's something that needs to be raised awareness of. And it was
yeah,
one of
yeah,
the reasons why I did ask you on here. I want to raise
yeah.
awareness for this, and I really want to help
Well,
you, not just because
great.
you're a good friend, but to
Yeah,
stop this happening again. It wasn't right what had happened. I
yeah.
obviously was in contact with as often as I could without
Mhm.
being overly
Yeah.
there, because I knew you had a lot to deal with. But you were always in my thoughts, as was Anne. I never had the privilege to meet her, but I knew how much she meant
Mhm.
to you, because
Yeah.
it's exactly how I feel about Alison. And if
Yes,
I went
indeed.
through like that, I wouldn't have been as strong as what you were able to do. So I have a lot
Uh,
of respect for you, my friend.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. And the next time we do something like this, I want to be saying, I knew him before he was really famous. So
Well,
onward and upward.
we never know, my friend. Like it's the same.
Well,
It's the
somebody,
same deal.
Graham Norton can't keep it going on a Friday night forever. So,
Well, we'll
get your
see how.
eyes on the prize.
Yeah, we'll see how we go. And until
Okay,
then, I'll just keep working and
yeah.
helping the good people like I can. So until
Okay,
next time, everybody, I've been
okay,
Andrew
right.
Durnan. This has been the amazing Campbell Duke. Take care. Stay safe.
Okay, thank you.
Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Bye.